Hello, everyone. Have about 4 or 5 people here. So that's good. Welcome, everyone. We'll just be getting started in a few minutes. We're just waiting for everyone to hit, and it's coming up to 2 p.m.
Se trop faute, vamos seus. Aí vou para cá présentement, vou na
Hi there. Yeah, we're just coming up to 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time here in Canada. So I know that we have people all around the world, I think, which is fascinating, amazing. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you happen to be around the world. And thank you very much for joining us.
Good morning to everybody.
Oui, ça dépend.
Okay. Good. What we will do is we'll just, as we get going, we'll just ask you all to mute your microphones once we get going, but obviously we'll invite you to unmute because we want to make this a very interactive session as well. We'll certainly be inviting your thoughts and your comments. I'd ask you just primarily to mute yourselves and then to unmute as and when you need to wish to say something. Marvelous, okay. And just looking at the few people, I believe Victoria, we have Victoria from Abu Dhabi on the line. Hello, Victoria. And we have, yeah. Just looking at who else do we have coming in. I may not be able to see all of you just because of my screen, but you know, please feel free to contribute, and we're always happy to share your thoughts as well, and for you to share your thoughts with you know, with the group. I think it's always important, these types of sessions, always very useful to get different ideas and thoughts around this. And so we certainly welcome any thoughts that you do have. How are we off for time, Leona? Do we?
We are at 1:58, so a couple more minutes.
Okay, wonderful.
Got anyone else coming in?
Yeah. I know it's quite late, so we have people from the UK, I think, and also from, I believe, from Mauritius as well. So it's fairly late.
Yes, I'm from Mauritius.
Yes. Hello there. Hi. Welcome. And glad you could make it.
It's 10 o'clock in the night here.
10 o'clock. Okay. Marvelous.
In the night.
Us. Fantastic. Well, I'm so happy that you could. Well, hopefully we'll try not to send you off to sleep before the end of the session.
It's only 1 hour. It's okay.
That's it. That's good.
Well, thanks for joining us so late in your evening. We appreciate it.
Absolutely. How's life in Mauritius? Is it nice and warm now?
We are just in confinement. We're in full confinement, actually.
Okay.
It's the second wave.
Yes.
It started 1 month ago, and we are up to the 25th of April.
Okay, right. Yes, we have just had a lockdown announced in Canada as well. Similar timing, I think, isn't it, Leona? About a week, 4 weeks or so. That yes, it doesn't seem to be going away. This is the big problem. Big
so
problem.
being among the seniors, I have not gone out of the house for the last 5 weeks. I mean, I was in the yard, but not on the streets.
Yes. Well, that's the worrying thing as well, isn't it? It affects people in different ways, and just best to take precautions, and we will get past that. And we'll be talking about, you know, the impact of the pandemic on stress in our session as well today. So good. Well, we've hit the hour, top of the hour. So I think we'll get started. And so welcome everyone. So
welcome.
You'll know that those of you that joined us previously, our first session was around smashing the anger cycle. And you know, anger is closely related to stress, which is what we're going to be talking about today. And the focus is for you to come away with some practical tips and strategies to manage stress in the workplace, but also outside of it, because I think the principles are the same. We also want to build in some time for questions and for it to be very interactive. Well, sorry, Kanu, I'll just ask you to mute if you may then, and I'll just, there we are. Okay. Super, there you go. So just whilst we're presenting, and then obviously anytime you'll have the opportunity to unmute and raise any questions. I see there's a hand up from Vimal. Vimal, do you have a question at all? No, okay.
No, I couldn't hear, so I've just managed to hear now. Thank you.
Perfect, okay, good. Everyone's online, can hear me and see me, that's good. And Leona, of course. Well, and so welcome to the session. And so, yeah, so just before we're going to talk about practical tips and strategies, because all of what we discuss here is really about taking away things that you can really use in your daily lives. And although we can only really scratch the surface to some extent, because it's such a vast subject, hopefully, you know, we'll be able to give you that guidance and things that you can take away. But obviously, do follow up. Leona and I will be sharing our details in the follow-up email after the webinar. And so, very happy for you to raise any further questions. And please feel free as well to dive in with any questions or comments that you have as well. So before we move into the session, just a little bit about ourselves. Just for myself, Paul Dubal, I help small and mid-sized businesses develop a culture of leadership and integrity. So I've been working with a lot of organizations really to develop that culture that, you know, people want to work in that type of organization. They don't want to leave that organization. My background is corporate, which is why I'm so passionate about helping organizations create those better cultures using emotional intelligence and authentic leadership as a foundation. And, you know, I truly believe that over the next 10 years that the investment in human capital will increase exponentially, particularly post-pandemic, as companies truly sort of realize the value that great leadership and a committed, engaged workforce can bring to the organization. But I also like to help individuals to help them navigate those blind spots in their own unique career path and hopefully career path to success. Because I find that helping people make small adjustments to their mindset and their approaches can actually have a dramatic difference in the way that they, you know, succeed in an organization. So that's really my sort of background. Leona, would you like to introduce yourself and your passions and what you love to do?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm Leona, founder of Ginamai Consulting and Training. And I work with nonprofits specifically, and my focus really is the middle managers within those organizations, because I think middle managers get sandwiched between frontline and what all their people need and upper management and what they're demanding. And often within organizations, and I've seen it firsthand myself, they're the last leaders on a leadership team to get the training they need. And so yeah, my passion is really too, very much like Paul was saying, about culture. It's about effective leadership, but vulnerable leadership, leadership that's open and honest. And so I do work with these organizations to build those skill sets, those critical leadership skill sets within their leadership teams. Yeah.
Okay, marvelous. Thank you very much. Thank you, Leona. And so when we think about those sort of leadership strategies, a lot of it is, we've seen ourselves that leaders experiencing stress, and it is a major factor in the workplace and how people really react to that. But I know that, Leona, you've been doing some really amazing research around the statistics in regards to stress. And so what have you found from that?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of really interesting research. I mean, stress, like you were saying earlier, Paul, in this conversation, is this gamut of a topic, and obviously very relevant to us today as we all move through this pandemic and try to figure out how we're going to manage it well. And so I think that's added stress. But there's some recent interesting research that I have found really interesting related to stress. I've always thought of stress as this bad thing, right? Like it's something we need to avoid. We need to remove it from our life. It's killing us. And there's a scientist by the name of Kelly McGonigal. I think I'm pronouncing her name right. You can do a YouTube search and you'll find her TED Talk. But she has found some really astounding research related to stress. And so she has discovered that we can see a 43% increase of death. This sounds drastic, so stick with me here, of death among those who experience a lot of stress, but only for those who believe that stress is harmful to their health.
So
And
it's
that,
a belief system, you mean?
yeah,
Yes.
yeah. So it's not exactly, Paul, to your point, the stress itself, this staggering stat of 43% is really connected to that belief system that I have stress and it's bad for me and it's going to destroy my health, or whatever our belief systems might be about stress. And so the other thing she found too is that people who believed that it was not harmful had the lowest risk of dying compared to anybody in that study, including the people that had little stress. So again, mindset really played a big role in how people lived through stress and their perception of stress and what that actually meant on the output of their life, really.
So if I can just summarize that then. So what you're saying is actually that it's not the stress itself, it's actually the mindset and how we interpret stress and how we sort of think about stress is what could kill us or not, essentially.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. I mean, my first reaction to that was like, wait a minute, really? Really? Can I actually control to some degree my response to this and impact my health? Because I don't know how you've felt, Paul, about stress in the past, but I often feel like the stress in my life is something that's out of my control. Is that often your experience? Yeah.
It really is. And I think it's one of those things where I tended to be fairly reactive to stress. In other words, I didn't put in place strategies that would enable me to control and think about my stress levels. It was just one of these things that came over me in a wave. And then suddenly I had to deal with it, and I had no tools or strategies to deal with it. And I think it was only really when I sat down and did some deep thinking around what stress was and how one could actually respond to stress as opposed to reacting to stress. That's when I really found out that I could make some changes, and it was forward planning to a huge extent, and recognizing when I was feeling stress as well. And that's where the sort of self-awareness aspect that comes into it. But I think of these results actually, and they're extraordinary because it essentially makes the belief around stress, not stress itself, one of the sort of highest killers. I mean, higher than, I don't know, diabetes or anything like that. It's actually that, oh yeah, we're feeling stressed, and therefore that's a bad thing, and we feel worse because we're feeling stressed, and it becomes this vicious cycle, doesn't it, really? Yeah. So is it breaking that sort of vicious cycle and turning it into something more positive?
I think so, but I also don't want to negate the fact that there's plenty of research out there that does speak to the fact that stress is bad for our health, right? But I think it's the chicken or the egg almost situation. But is it the stress, to your point, Paul, is it the stress itself that is bad for us? Or do we actually create this added stress by the way that we perceive the situation we're in? And is that what is causing the damage related to our health, right?
Because, so in other words, are we managing it properly? And that's really what it's about, isn't it? Because I think we recognize that stress is an endemic part of our lives. We can't avoid stress, and that's not what we're talking about. It's how you actually deal with stress and embrace it. That's really the thing. And that's why, you mentioned about mindset, how critical that is. So in other words, it's having the tools and the strategies to be able to face stress head on, not to avoid it, but to be able to deal with it. And I find that staggering that these these statistics really speak to the fact that you really need to do this. There's no choice around it. You have to be able to manage stress because it's a killer otherwise. And I think that, yes, stress can be bad for you if it's long-term chronic stress and you do nothing about it. I think that's the key thing, isn't it, really?
Yeah, I think when we're under, to your point, this prolonged pressure, stress that we might experience in our lives, and we just kind of use the mentality of, I'm just going to plow through this. I'm just going to get through this without actually taking the time to stop and consider really effective strategies to manage it well and to channel it. I think we can channel stress the same way, like we talked about on our last conversation about channeling anger or emotions for that matter. I think there's room, based on what Kelly is saying here, then to channel our stress and to use it to make a difference. There's also research by what's his name, Daniel Levitin. He's a neuroscientist who speaks to this piece that stress does cause us to create cortisol, which, is we know, is not great for us, which can cause brain fog. And then if we're in the middle of needing to make critical decisions, obviously that's problematic, right? But if we know that, and we know that stress can create brain fog and impact our decisions, well, to Kelly's point, we can actually put things in place then to deal with that. So some of the things that Daniel's talking about is, we can be more organized. So that then there's the things that we might make errors on. There's an element of things then that we know we don't have to think about because we already have systems in place to manage those pieces. So again, it
a
comes
bit of
back
forward planning and just thinking about things that may actually cause you a degree of stress, and saying, well, this could be a problem. Like for example, we've got an early meeting the next morning. You've got to make sure that everything is in place, your car keys are in the right place and so on, so that you're not fumbling around and being stressed and looking for them when you've got to get out the door quickly. That's the sort of thing, is it?
Yes, absolutely. And I think Daniel actually provides an example of that in his video. He was trying to rush out to go catch a plane and managed to lock himself out of the house. And then the next thing you know, he's breaking a window to get into the house. And if he had just had a system in place to make sure, he forgot his passport, I think. If he just made a system or had been mindful of the fact that tomorrow morning was going to be stressful, I'm going to make sure that my keys and my passport and everything are maybe set by the front door, he could have eliminated this whole debacle of a situation that he wound up in. So yeah, it's about our mindset, being aware that we know we will be stressed. That's the nature of being
and recognizing, and of course, you mentioned about the brain fog, and I think I can really relate to that, because it's a bit like that whole anger that we talked about last time, that amygdala hijack, where you're not thinking rationally, and suddenly when the stress levels are rising, you can't think clearly. To your point, the cortisol is creating that brain fog. So when you're stressed, it's more important than ever to have the strategies in place to alleviate that stress. Yet our brain almost hijacks ourselves by creating that fog that prevents you from being able to get out of that situation. So that's when you can really become, absolutely a slave, if you like, to stress, and just fall into this pit of despair if you don't break out of it.
Yeah, for sure. It can become this spiral or rabbit hole that we can go down if we don't manage it well. And then I think about especially given the times that we're in now, and like we've talked about, in the middle of a pandemic, what does it mean? What does it mean in the middle of that? I mean, I do think specifically, in the work that I do as an organization, I'd love to hear your comments on this too, Paul, from your perspective with your clients. But this sort of information is really important to have when we think about the people that we're working with. So I'm in the nonprofit sector working with social services, specifically in the mental health and the autism world. So needless to say, the people I'm working with are their job is stressful. And they're managers, and they're leading programs, and they're leading people, and they're needing to make critical decisions. And if they don't have a good sense of their triggers and the things that make them stressed, or be able to, like you were saying earlier, to be able to identify their stress, that's when we start to see poor decision making. And that ultimately affects the people underneath of them. It can affect the reputation of their organization, depending how critical that decision is. So as I think about even this in relation to the work that I do, it's so helpful to be thinking about, how do I, in my design, in the work that I do with them and the conversations I have as we build other critical leadership skills, keep in mind that stress is going to play a role in everything they do. And how do I set them up for success to be able to really recognize that stress, to have the strategies they need to be able to manage it well. But what about you, Paul, when you think about the clients you work with?
Well, yeah, I think to your point, it's really going to have a huge impact on your ability to make an effective decision, because you're not thinking clearly. And I think that when I look at how stress has impacted me in the workplace, in the corporate world, for example, and the politics that can cause stress around that, I think one of the key things for me in working with organizations to improve their culture and their leadership skills, and what that really means is that the foundation is around emotional intelligence. And so I'm really helping clients to build strategies in the workplace that will increase their level of stress tolerance, their resilience as well, because that speaks as well to your ability to be able to handle stress as well. And of course, the problem solving skills, which, as you rightly mentioned, those problem solving skills that are so critical. You know, you're making a critical decision at a certain point in time, yet you're not making it in a position of strength because you're stressed out and you know that you've got 100 other things to do, for example, and you just need to get this off your plate or tick a box. And that is not a good foundation for problem solving or making critical decisions. And then, of course, all of the other aspects of corporate life, you know, the fact that you do get politics, you do get poor managers, and that can make you angry, and that can cause you to, you know, to react in ways that you later regret, and that whole element of impulse control. So all of these things are, you know, matters that can send stress spinning out of control to some extent. So you know, you need to, for me, I think it's important when I'm working with clients to understand that stress is always going to be there. And so when we look at those skills around resilience and the problem solving, all of those areas, it's creating a sense of self-awareness that you know that there's going to be situations where you have stressful decisions to make, you've got stressful interactions with colleagues, employees, etc. And therefore, if you're aware that that's going to happen, you can plan ahead. And a lot of what I do as well is to help managers to avoid those stress triggers, if you like, in the workplace. And it can be something as simple as planning your day ahead and prioritizing the most urgent tasks and to avoid over scheduling. But it can also include things such as being assertive and learning to say no. Because I know that in the past, one of the things that I often was guilty of myself was I'd find it very difficult to say no. And so it was, oh, give it to Paul because he can deal with it. He never says no, and it's an easy for somebody else to delegate. And then suddenly I'm thinking to myself, I cannot do this. I'm spreading myself too thinly. And so I had to learn those strategies about saying, well, actually, you know, without appearing negative, I cannot take this on at the moment. And the reason I can't and get those arguments in place. And so stress is always there. Stress is always going to be there, but it's how we manage it effectively. And that's why the EQ elements, so many of those foundational skills are so important. Another one is conflict management as well. And I think that's something that can cause a huge degree of stress for people in and out of the workplace, because it's any relationship. And being able to have strategies that can enable you to manage conflict by, for example, asking questions and not treating it as necessarily a win-lose scenario. All of those things can be valuable skills that will then reduce that level of stress that you're feeling at the moment. What are your thoughts around that? Is that similar work you're doing?
Yeah, I venture to suggest that right now, in the middle of a pandemic, we take into consideration that most of us are probably working from home. Our home is busier than it usually is. Our routines are out of whack. I mean, as we go into a second lockdown here, like there's lesser things that I can do. My routines are out of whack. And so I think naturally it just feels like there's more conflict in my life, whether that's within the relationships I have or just in being able to get my job done or to get things done that I want to get done in a timely manner, or planning. Like, I mean, I realized when did we go into lockdown? Thursday. So
Thursday,
Wednesday, I realized this was coming down the pipes, and I'm like, oh shoot, okay,
again.
right, again. And it's like, okay, now what do I need to think about? I need to, because everything's going to be going to curbside pickup, and I know I'd rather be in the store being able to see what I can find. And like all of a sudden my days derailed again because I had all these other things I wanted to do, but now I'm planning for a lockdown. And I think a lot of us are experiencing just overall just this constraint and tension and conflict, if you will, in our just everyday personal lives. And then it's then managing the stress that comes from all of that, and being mindful that maybe when we do have those moments where we lose it a little over the smallest thing in the world, that we do understand it's the last straw to break the camel's back.
Absolutely.
Probably
It's a combination of factors, isn't it, really, that's
and being
build
gentle
up.
and compassionate with ourselves as we move through this time, I think, is really important. Not to be too self-critical that, I can't believe I'm bawling my eyes out over this right now, but it's accumulation effect of just everything else that I have going on in my life. And just being sensitive to that for myself, but for other people too. Just being mindful that we are going to make mistakes. I was driving the other day and I pulled out in front of someone and I'm like, oh shoot, I backed up, and she so kindly pulled up beside me, rolled down her window and said, it's okay, I make that mistake all the time. Like myself.
So nice.
And I think having more of those interactions in our lives, being sensitive to the needs of other people as well as our own, is going to be so helpful as a society and as humanity as we move through this really kind of unprecedented time, right?
They're amazing points, and I think they resonate with me so much, because when I think about everything that we're going through, I think that it's tested our mental resolve more than ever, hasn't it? I mean, if we really think that these things really have had a global impact on all of us at unprecedented times. I mean, what we're facing now is a crisis that I think is probably none of us have ever faced a crisis of such sort of global proportions at any time in our lives. But of course, it does create an opportunity for, to some extent, reflection and recalibration, because I think many of us would probably subscribe to the view that the trajectory we're on, even before the pandemic, was not a particularly healthy or sustainable one. What I mean by that is that we were still living busy lives, and we were out, okay, we weren't in our homes at the time, or imprisoned in our homes, or whatever it is, but we're still out there having very busy, stressful lives, and that sort of chronic low level of stress that people are feeling all the time, and not actually thinking and setting back and saying, hey, I can't go on like this. And I think to some extent, if we look at the pandemic, and it's, there's been so many negatives to it, but what it has done, I think, is given us an opportunity to reset and to think about how we live our lives in a different way. And one of the things that I've been really trying to do is to build my mental resilience, and to think about all of the interactions that I'm now having in this new normal, as it were. And so, for example, that could be that I'm trying to be less judgmental of people. And what I mean by that is that, let's say, to your point, Leona, you pulled out in front of somebody, and if that had been me, I'd say, "Oh, what are you doing, you crazy woman?"
Yep. And I wouldn't blame you, because I might have been saying the same thing if I was.
we never know. But actually, the lady that you pulled out in front showed a huge amount of empathy, and I think that's marvelous, because what that really means is that she's not judgmental, because she's appreciating that we're all suffering in different ways, and we all have a different propensity to suffer, or indeed to have resilience against suffering. And therefore, being less judgmental of people will mean that you're actually less stressed, because as soon as you get angry in that interaction where the car's pulled out in front of you, you know, your anger is up there, which means your stress is up there. So if you can just say, "Oh, okay, that person's having a bad day. It's okay, everything's good," and move on with your life, then instantly, you know, you've got those strategies in place to reduce your level of stress. And so I think that if you really sit down and now reflect on everything that's happened, to your point about being kind to ourselves as well, and not being so self-critical and so harsh on ourselves, because we're in an unprecedented situation, we don't know how we're going to respond, and we don't know how resilient we are. And so it's okay to sometimes feel vulnerable and stressed and tearful as well over these situations. I think it's important to recognize, and everything that I think we've looked at and studied, Leona, is not about avoiding certain emotions and certain, you know, feelings that we have, but actually just how we respond to them. Because no matter, you know, somebody said to me that you can't control the stressful events in your life, and that's probably true. But no matter what our situation, no matter how bad it is, we always have the choice, and the choice is to respond in a way that's most appropriate for us. We always have that choice to respond. So I think that's something we can recognize. Don't know, what are your thoughts around that?
Yeah, as you were talking there, it made me go to some of Susan David's research around emotional agility. She's got great TED Talks too. If you haven't figured out on this call already, I love TED Talks. I watch a lot of them. But she's got a whole book, actually, I think I have it right here, called Emotional Agility, Get Unstuck, Embrace Change, and Thrive in Your Life. And it is, I highly, highly recommend this book. Because she really does talk about rigidity versus agility, versus agility. And we can be really rigid sometimes. And I know I have, I'm loads guilty of that, of getting really rigid and stuck in my ways of thinking that can be really unhelpful. But agility just requires us not to judge any of the emotions that come up, you know, whether that's anger, frustration, sadness, overwhelm, anxiety, as I'm sure many of us are experiencing different elements of that right now. Not to judge those as necessary, and we talked about this too, bad or right or wrong or good, just to notice it, just to use it again as data, and to say, okay, this emotion's coming up for me. Why?
Yeah.
Why is this
and that's the
coming up?
self-awareness, isn't it?
That's the huge self-awareness.
Yeah.
And that's the ability then to say, okay, I'm noticing this. This is maybe coming from X, or this is coming from Y, or I'm not really sure. Maybe I need to sit with this for a little bit and see, like, where might this be coming from? And so we kind of we take a step back and we just look. Like you were saying earlier, with this pandemic, it's really caused me in many ways to pause in my life, to just stop, just slow down, and really ask myself some meaningful questions about what I want to be doing with my life. And that would not have happened if I wasn't forced to do it. And I was forced to do it through a pandemic, and through job loss. And so, yes, do I love the experience right now of having, you know, being in these situations and having gone through these experiences that I have in the last year? No, but can I be grateful and thankful for them because they've opened up other opportunities? Yes. And understanding that those two things can coexist. It's not either or, but they coexist. I think then also allows us to be compassionate with ourselves and kind with ourselves and others. when we understand that there's complexities to this and it's not black and white.
And I think that's a very positive way of looking at it. You're looking at the good things that's happened out of a bad situation. You're seeing that silver lining in the cloud and recognize. And I think that's also important as well, that we have to, I think we've all been guilty, and I know I have, of really not appreciating everything that we have in life. And we talk about this attitude of gratitude. And it's a popular saying, but it's popular because it works. If you actually really fully sit back and appreciate everything that you have in life and the gifts that you have, it's going to put you in a much better frame of mind at the beginning of every day, rather than thinking, I want this or I want that and I don't have this. We're fortunate in a way that whilst we're all in a situation that ultimately will not last forever, we have things that we can look forward to. And so one of the things that I've also been doing is sort of planning what's post-pandemic going to look like. And that could be planning a holiday, planning meeting with friends, and doing things that I really am looking forward to doing. So my mind is focused on looking ahead and appreciating everything that I currently have. We are very fortunate in a way, and I think it's important that we, to your point, use that time for reflection as well, because I think that people were probably fairly complacent and took things for granted before the pandemic. That here's our life and we're going to always be able to see friends, we're always going to be able to go out. No one's ever going to tell us to stay in our homes. That's crazy. This is not an authoritarian state or whatever. Well, for us, this is Canada and it's a free country, and so no one likes to be told those things, but we have taken things for granted. And I think it's I'm hoping and I'm optimistic around this, that given all of the mental health challenges that people have faced and are facing in this pandemic, in this unprecedented situation, that people will actually now put better emphasis on their mental health in the same way that we put emphasis on our physical health by going to the gym or exercising regularly, that we'll do mental health exercises. And that could be that self-reflection, meditation, all mindfulness, all of those things that I think can help you to stay calm in moments of stress. And I firmly believe that will become more established. And I really think that's a good thing, that people will come out of this, hopefully, as you mentioned as well, Leona, that they have self-compassion. They recognize that none of us are perfect and we have emotions, and sometimes those emotions get better of us and we don't beat ourselves up about it, and we're not hypercritical of ourselves. But equally, we come out of this, we emerge out of the chrysalis, if you like, into a group of people or a species that is actually more compassionate of our neighbor as well, that we look after each other, because the sense of community, of course, has been eroded over years and years, and maybe this is an opportunity to get that back to some extent, and to really look after people. I mean, there's been some amazing, wonderful, heartwarming stories about in the pandemic about people looking out for each other, whether it be seniors down the road or whatever, and calling them up and making sure they're okay, that they're not lonely, all of those things. And I think that to me is a really, really good sign, a good thing that's come out of the pandemic.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we are talking about mental health more, which is a good thing.
Yeah, it's
sad
part of the
that
conversation.
Yeah, it's sad though that it takes a pandemic to get us to talk about it. But if that's what it takes so that we can even start moving the mental health conversation forward, then let's do it. I'm just noticing that Vimal has her hand up. Did you have a question?
I think she was saying that she couldn't hear, but I think she's okay now. So yeah. Okay, so actually, you mentioned about your job loss, and that must have been a huge stressor for you, Leona. Can you tell us about that and what went through your mind and how you approached that?
Yeah, I mean, um, that was stressful if you were to lump it into like one word. But what's interesting to me too to think about was the stress came from really kind of unmanaged emotions, if you
Mm,
will, or
mm,
emotions that were really I was really moving through, whether that was anger, frustration, guilt,
mm,
overwhelm, the why me, what does this mean, worry about the future, and now I don't have a job and I don't have an income.
mm.
What does this mean to move forward, which then ultimately creates this level of stress. um,
Yeah. Mm,
and yeah, there was value, I think, in sitting with that for some time and building that agility piece around just looking at it, like what are
mm.
those emotions that I'm feeling, and why, where do they come from? And some of them, I think, if I'm honest, came from previous past experiences, because my brain was recognizing this situation as something similar to what happened over there.
Yeah.
And some of it was related very specifically to the event and things that had occurred, before that. And so um yeah, it's a process though, and I think that's the thing we need to remember, is that as we start to look at how we're managing our stress, that it's not a light switch effect.
Mm,
That we can't just talk ourselves out of stress. We can't just say, I'm not, and I believe in, positive affirmations. But how does it actually translate? How does that translate into actual behavior change that affects my life in a positive way? I think we often talk about self-care.
mm.
We need to engage in more self-care. And I struggle with this concept of self-care sometimes, because it honestly can feel like I'm just adding more to my overwhelming plate. So my
Yeah.
plate's already full, and now I've got to find room for yoga. And now I need to find room for meditation. And now
Yeah.
I need to
Yeah.
find room for, reading books. And there's all these other things that I need to add to my plate. And all of a sudden I'm stressed about the self-care.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
this
Yeah.
doesn't work.
It's a
And
very
so
individual thing as well, isn't it?
it
Yeah.
is a very individual thing, but I'm wondering if there's actually room for us to reframe or for me, maybe people don't have this definition of self-care, but for me to reframe my definition of self-care, that self-care is not necessarily engaging in more pleasurable things or
Mm,
even more activities that are related to me, but it
yeah.
can be sometimes shifting my current habits to reflect more healthier habits,
Okay.
so
Mm. And so it's a
taking
mindset approach, really.
it
Yeah.
is a
Yeah.
mindset approach, and it's taking what's already in my life and looking at it and saying, okay, well, what here just isn't working very well.
Mm,
Maybe I'm not getting 8 hours of sleep. I'm only getting 5.
mm,
Okay, well,
mm.
that doesn't work. And that's going to add to my brain fog. So
Yes.
what kind of behaviors can I engage in or shift so that I am getting 8 hours of sleep? So that I'm going to 6 to 7 to 8 too, and remembering that these sorts of changes in our lives to manage stress need to be incremental and
Yeah.
small.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Saying
Yeah.
saying to myself,
They
I'm
can
going to
make a big
reduce my
difference. Yeah.
yeah, and that it does in the long run. And I think that's the key, saying to myself, well, I'm going to manage my health and I'm going to start running 5K 3 times a week. Well, if I'm not running at all, it's not going
Mm,
to be very long till I've stopped running,
yeah.
because that does feel very overwhelming. But what is the small incremental step I can engage in that would get me to running 5K in a month from now, so that it's
Yeah.
safe
Yeah.
and it
Yeah.
lasts? And now I actually have a habit in my life that is helping me manage my
It's more
stress.
sustainable as well, isn't it? Than doing the
Yeah.
whole new running thing and so on, because eventually that will just cause you stress and you'll stop doing it. So
Yeah,
yeah. Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And just very briefly on the sort of workplace as well, I think that uh, the whole aspect around losing a job, or then how to now, you and I, we're both now working self-employed, and that in itself brings some challenges as well, just how we sort of manage ourselves. But I think one of the things that for me is very, very important is that, and what to me has built my resilience, is my belief in what I'm doing. And I think that having a sense of purpose and a mission, not just in your job or your career or your as an entrepreneur, but in your life generally, for example, even in retirement, and that's been shown to increase people's optimism, general happiness and longevity as well. We talked about the mindset around stress, being about around being able to live longer, and it really can have an amazing impact on your life just by having a sense of mission. And that doesn't have to be a big mission or purpose. It can just be something like, every day, what am I going to do to feel, to keep myself busy and engaged and just enjoying the day? It can be as simple as that. And so having that sort of sense of purpose, I think, is very, very important in whatever you do. And I recall reading an article recently which described a lady who worked on an assembly line building heart pacemakers. And she was passionate about her job because she said that every device that she made saved a life, and therefore, of course, deeply passionate about quality control, because a failure in the device could mean a life lost. And so bringing that, and so her passion was around developing products that would save lives. It wasn't just about, assembling it on the factory floor or whatever. And having that sort of sense of passion and purpose around your job, I think, will just naturally make you more resilient and be able to deal with adversity, because we're all going to face it, without succumbing to stress in that situation. So again, building that mental toughness and that resilience because you really, truly, strongly believe what you're doing, I think is very, very important. And so I just want to pause at this point, Leona, and I'm going to now just open it up to the floor as well. And I want to put forward, I've just got a poll here, and I'll be very, very interested in the responses from everyone. I'm just going to launch a poll here. And so the poll here is, what areas do you feel you could use some guidance? And so these are areas that I know I've had problems with in the past. And so I'll be very curious to get people's thoughts and responses around this. So for example, how to deal with difficult colleagues, how to deal with fear and worry, how to communicate with impact, giving effective feedback, improving relationships at work, and improving what was that? How to embrace, I think that was how to embrace, what was that one, number 4? Sorry about that. How to embrace change was, rather than just how to embrace, because we can't do that at the moment, of course.
No, we can't. Unfortunately.
That's the one thing we're not allowed to do during the pandemic, how to embrace, yeah. Now, this is interesting, because actually, if I'm going to end the poll now and just share the results, because if we look at the responses here, there actually is a very, very interesting, because there's multiple answers as well. Everyone has something in that area that they need work on. So let me just share the results. Hopefully everyone can see the results of the poll there. And so you'll see that everyone has, challenges and needs guidance in all of these areas. And, these are areas that we of course address, don't we, Leona, in our 2-day course, which is focused on the how-to. So if you're struggling with any of these areas and are really serious about developing your skills, approaches and strategies to know how to become more skilled and happier in all of these areas, then I certainly recommend you to consider our 2-day course, because we deal with a lot of these strategies, and it's a practical focus as well. That's really the important thing around it. It's not just saying, well, I need to do this, but it's how you do it, and that's often where you need that guidance. And so please feel free, everyone, to note in the chat function whether you think that training on how to enhance your skills in these areas would be a benefit to you. So just type yes in the chat function if you think that this is going to be beneficial to you, and we'll be happy to send out details after the today's session as well. And also, of course, feel free to say how it would benefit you as well. You know, what is it that you could benefit, and how do you think you could benefit from attending such a session? What are your thoughts? And just also, just whilst we're doing that, just wanted to pause if anyone has any questions at this point as well. You know, if there's anything that we've said that you wanted to discuss, talk about, or raise any questions. Just looking, Leonie, you can see the responses as well. Yeah. Okay. So I've only got a couple of yeses on the chat function, and so I'm surprised at that, because everyone said that they could do with support on that. So do I have anyone out there that's another yes? Okay. Everyone's shy today, Leona, I think. That's what it is. So let me just did everyone see the results anyway? First of all, I just wanted to get confirmation everyone saw those results. Perhaps if someone could just give me an indication that they've seen the results. Yeah. Okay. I'm just going to end. Did people see the result? Oh, okay. Leonie, can you see the results there?
Yeah, it's showing up on my screen.
Oh, okay, right, okay. Apologies, everyone. Maybe I think I hadn't shared the results properly with everyone. But yeah, so we can just sort of see here, dealing with difficult colleagues, 17%. How to deal with fear and worry. That's interesting, because that's a big one, isn't it? 67% of people have an issue around that, of those that have voted. And improving relationships at work, 17%. Giving effective feedback, that's one of the things I've really struggled with in the past. And so I think that's a very, very key. How to really be able to get the best out of your team, and how to communicate with impact. I think those two are very closely related as well. So good. I'll stop sharing that then. And good. Thanks everyone for participating in that poll. And so let's move on. In the absence of any further questions, we'll have a little bit of time just towards the end. We're moving towards the end. We'll have a little bit of time for further questions as well. And so when we think about stress, so you talked about self-care, of course, and being kind to yourself, Leona, and cultivating that sort of sense of resilience and optimism, and not being too self-critical. And I think related to that as well is not falling into that sort of victim mentality as well. And what I mean by that is that sometimes it's very easy for us to say, well, we're the victim of circumstance and this wasn't our fault. We had nothing to do with it. It's very easy to do that. But of course, that is taking away responsibility from your own actions and thoughts. And it's essentially blaming others for your misfortune. Have you ever sort of felt in that situation where you've been a victim of circumstance, and how have you sort of dealt with it, you know, from a mental perspective? You talked about obviously, you know, losing your job and so on, and there was some guilt attached to it. You were saying.
Yeah, well, let's be honest. I've ruminated, I've analyzed, I've blamed. You know, I think we all can sometimes go there first, and that's okay. Like, again, coming back to this compassion piece, that not making ourselves wrong for reacting to our emotions. It's just then, what do we do with them, and can we identify them clearly in a way that, one, provides insight for ourselves, but two, then gives us direction on how to move forward. And so I think, like when I think about my earlier experience this year of losing my job, there was all of those things, and I was angry and I was upset and I was mad, you know, but then having the time to, you know, a few weeks later, be able to really sit with that and to look at it and to say, okay, well, from here, now what? What, you know, and asking ourselves those questions sometimes. So what does this mean? Or why is this important to me? Why does this matter?
So it's your interpretation around the stressful event that was so important to you to get to where you want it to be.
Yeah, and really understanding that I think the event itself is not is not the thing that's creating the stress, and not blaming the event or the people that were a part of that event, but understanding that my stress is coming from how I've perceived that event, or what I have made sense of related to that event, or what I deem is important or not important about that event, or what it means about me. Often, a lot of the times, that's where our anger and frustration can come from, because, well, it means that I don't know what I'm doing, or it means that I wasn't good enough, or it means that we do have sometimes these self deprecating beliefs about ourselves that these kind of stressful situations can play into and then play havoc on.
Yes.
So owning that, and being able to kind of set that aside and look at, well, what is actually true here? And what does that mean for me now as I move forward? And really thinking about that piece of, how do I move forward from this?
And not avoiding the stress and the emotions that are around it, but actually embracing it, owning it, recognizing it, and building those strategies to deal with it. Very, very important. So if we were to think about some strategies around how to manage stress, I mean, we've touched on them as we've talked today, but let's say all our good people here attending today, if they were to take away approaches, tips and strategies from today, what any thoughts around that? What can they take away? What are your suggestions around that? Some practical tips and approaches?
Yeah, I think it's, whether it's picking one area of your life right now that could use some work or some tweaking, or looking for, ultimately, what do you want to change, and what is that? And maybe it is being able to run 10K. I don't know. Everyone's got their own goals, right? But what I caution you against is starting there and saying, okay, my goal is to run 10K. How can you make this goal of wanting to run 10K one laughably small, tiny step? And I say laughably small because the research shows that when we commit to one commitment, whatever that is, it needs to be easier to do than to justify not doing.
Yeah.
Right.
It's like those New Year's resolutions, isn't it?
Oh, well, I mean, even that's interesting. How many people here have had a New Year's resolution or engaged in that?
Yeah. Mine finished on the 2nd of January, so
yeah, yeah, exactly. Or fulfilled on it. I mean, we know that 92% of New Year resolutions fail by January 21st.
Right.
And that's because they're often too vague, too big. They don't take reality into account. They're not clear, and so on. Or there's too many steps, So again, coming back to this piece of, what is one really, really small thing you could do? So maybe it's running 10K, but what I do know I could do is that when I go to get my coffee in the morning, I'm going to do one push-up before I pour my cup of coffee. That's manageable. I can get down on the floor and do one push-up. And maybe while I'm down there, 5 seems, I could push out a few more. And then all of a sudden, then we add, once we've mastered that, then we add to the next level, then we add to the next level. For some people, if it's running, it's just that before I grab my coffee, I open the front door and I walk out on the porch and I come back in.
So what you're saying,
starting that habit.
Yeah. So you're suggesting then that we build one habit that can address and that's an individual habit that can address, how we can tackle stress. Just one thing that we really commit to, and we use that to build momentum for other changes in our lives. But just that one commitment, rather than a whole range of things that may just get lost because it's too much, it's too overwhelming.
Yeah, really, if the goal is too lofty, you're gonna, I know from my own experience, it's gonna be much harder to stick to. You're probably gonna fall into that 92% of people that don't fulfill the goal. So how can you take something that you're currently already doing and shift it into a new behavior that's related to something that you want to change? There's some other, I mean, I'm all about the stats and the research. There's one other stat I find really interesting too, that when we commit to one thing, or one small behavior change, we have a 78% likelihood of actually fulfilling that. The minute you add a second, that likelihood drops to 11%.
Wow, that's staggering, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. And so I think, again, it comes back to this being kind, compassionate with ourselves, being willing to take small steps. That's not my natural go-to. I tend to be someone that wants to set these really lofty goals, and then I get frustrated with myself when I can't fulfill them. Well, so how do we actually create a space for success? And to your point, like when you consider how we're designing the 2-day course that we're looking to do, it's building that methodology into this, that people aren't just having an experience of tick box, I did a 2-day workshop. Okay, great. No,
It's building on it.
Yeah, how do you take what you've learned and actually apply it in your life? How do you actually make sure that this is changing something and making it long lasting for you, that it's becoming the normal thing? Like, not normal is not the word I want here, but it's the habitual thing that you would do, and it's leading to success, and shifting the things that don't get us there. But that does require a level of accountability. It requires a level of coming together and support to be able to set up those intentions and then be able to fulfill them.
And sometimes that means having guidance to do that, and somebody that holds you accountable, like a coach or a mentor as well, that can actually hold you to those promises that you've made yourself as well. For me, one of the things I think that I've really tried to work on. I mean, we can talk about all those relaxation strategies around yoga and even meditation, that we all sort of know about. But for me, I think it's really trying to build connections. And one of the things that I've really tried to do here is during the pandemic, so I know that I can't get to see people in person, but just to reach out to people, and because I think that is that's also, research has shown that that's a big stress reliever, just actually reaching out and picking up the phone or texting, because people rarely speak on the phone these days, but texting, zooming a person that you haven't spoken to for a while, and just catching up and say, hey, how are things going? And I was reading a very interesting article the other day that said, well, when people receive a message like that, they actually receive 5 times as much satisfaction from receiving the message as you do from giving it. So, when you reach out to someone, it's a huge boost for them, out of proportion to you actually sending the message. And I think that's so important to recognize. And again, this is where we support each other and help each other through these unprecedented times. It's a great stress reliever just to reach out to people and chew the fat and complain about what's going on in the world. It's a problem shared is definitely a problem halved. And so,
absolutely.
So to me, that's the one big thing I'm committing to.
That's great. That's great. And I think that that's wonderful, because I think as human beings, we are designed to be in relationship. That we are designed to need other human beings to rely on, in the sense of experiencing connection. And a lot of our value sometimes and our purpose comes from those very connections that we have with other human beings. And so I challenge you, Paul, to take that into like a laughably small step as you take that on, right?
It becomes easier as you do it. It becomes easier as you do it. And one of the things I've also found, and again, we look for the positives around everything that's happened with the pandemic. And to me, I think it's a recognition that actually, people are strong. We're all stronger than we think. We're all made of tougher stuff and character than we think, and as they say, tough times don't last, tough people do. And I think it's really important that we keep those connections and recognize that we will all get through this, and we've all approached it in our different ways. But I think it's been a tribute to us, our strength of character, our resilience and inner strength, to show that we are going to get through this. And like I say, we are going to be stressed about it, but our stress is telling us something. It's a signal to us, and recognizing when that signal comes and doing something about it. And you know, just really to the point we talked about before, stress can be your friend, because stress is telling you something, and it can actually propel you to greater performance as well. I know that, for example, when I'm standing up doing a presentation or even coaching, say, a group of individuals, I feel that sort of butterflies and a little bit, and I need to think about things, and there's a little level of stress there. But of course, what that's doing is it's propelling me to greater performance, because if I didn't feel anything at all, I would be completely complacent and not really perform to the level I know I can do if I didn't have that. So stress is a good thing in that sense. It's just how we deal with it and how we manage it. And that's obviously what we've talked about today, having some of those strategies. And so I want to ask a final question, and then before I open it up to the audience, because I certainly want to hear people's viewpoints as well about and takeaways from the session. But Leona, how do we shift the mindset that's been around maybe for 30 or 40 years? How do we break those huge habits that we have that are ingrained in us? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really great question, because I think about it for myself too, because I've got a lot of really unhelpful habits sometimes, right, around that I would love to change. I think it really does come back to kind of the original pieces that we were talking about around, again, being patient with ourselves, being compassionate, being willing to reflect, being willing to face our emotions, to actually look at them in a non-critical, non-judgmental way. And to your point, to see them as data. And so what is this telling me? What do I need to know from here? And I really do come back to that piece too, around really identifying small wins, small things that I can do, change or shift within my life. You know, it could be something as simple as I'm going to eat, you know, one vegetarian meal a week. You know, it could be something as small as that, because I already know I have to eat. That behavior is already there of needing to cook a meal. So what can I do within that behavior that's already there and shift it so that I'm doing, you know, one thing that's healthier, or one thing that's more aligned with a value that I have in my life that I want to take on. Yeah.
And can you break those habits? I mean, we've talked about a habit taking around 21 to 28 days or so. That's generally what commentators say around building a new habit. You do it every day for that period of time. And that doesn't actually seem a lot when you consider 30 or 40 years of habits, bad habits that you may have. So are we saying that we can break those habits, that it's never too late to change, I suppose?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I think we can. I think we can take existing habits that we currently have and attach a new habit to it, and start to overlap, if you will, this new behavior connected to, or slowly turn it into this other behavior. Looking at what do we currently do? What's the current habit that we have, and how are we going to shift it?
Yeah, I think, you know, one of the things that we've learned as well, just in our studies, is that the brain is immensely, flexible, plasticity, as they call it, you know, and even those old established habits can be undone with the right discipline. You know, you've got these neural pathways that are cast in stone, as it were, over the last 30, 40 years. But actually, once you start to create new neural pathways, they then build and become stronger, and can actually break down the old ones. So you can actually build new habits and break out the old bad habits over a fairly minimal time period. I mean, 28 days compared to 30 years is nothing. But I think the thing is, you need, when you do that, it's one thing to say, oh yeah, I can create these new habits, but I know myself that I need support, accountability, and I need guidance in order to see that through. And as we said before, if somebody's holding me accountable, I'm much more likely to achieve my good intentions. And so it's interesting though that you know, we're never too late to learn new things. We're never too late to undo bad habits as well. And so I wanted now to maybe open it up to the audience and just to ask, you can either unmute for one takeaway that you'll commit to. So out of everything that you've heard, I'll be very, very interested to hear from the audience. What is one thing that they can now take away and commit to after today's session? And please unmute, or happy for you to put it into the chat function, whatever works for you. I'll be very interested to see what people's answers are around this, you know, because I think you mentioned that it's one thing to commit to, one thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Any thoughts at all from anyone? Maybe it's something that needs a considerable degree of thought around, because it is difficult
and I
to
think
come up with something straight away. Sorry, carry on.
Leona and Paul, thank you very much.
Hi, Camilo. How are you?
Not too bad, not too bad. Thank you.
Good.
Yes, well, thanks a lot for touching on a very, very sometimes taboo subject to open up and discuss. So I think it's really nice to know that this is an issue, and with the pandemic, obviously, this became more and more evident. I will come out and say change sometimes brings stress, like a new job, taking on new challenges, and and listen, I think we did that right before the pandemic. So sometimes it was a mix of things that come together, and I believe you guys mentioned this. It's the accumulation sometimes, plus the accumulations of everything else.
Yes.
And we don't. And for me, it's always been the one thing at a time, because or else. And when we try to do it all and think about everything all at the same time, is when you really get deep down, and sometimes you don't know if you'll get out of it. So I think mental health nowadays in relation to stress, I think the most important, I think Leona mentioned it, it's small thoughts, positive thoughts, and eventually just tackle one thing at a time, and know that it'll pass. I think that's also another thing. It's not, you're not going to be stressed forever, or hopefully you won't be. Anyway.
Yeah, it's about cultivating the right mindset, isn't it, Camilo, as well? Just being able to develop that mental resilience.
Mm-hmm. Correct.
And practicing that as well. No, that's super. Thank you so much for that. That's a great point that you've made. Anyone else at all? All right, fantastic. Well, you know, these are great discussions to have, and I know that I'm confident that you'll go away with a great deal of food for thought, and I'm always appreciative that you have spent your time to listen to Leona and I, and really for us to have that opportunity to share our thoughts around this. And I think, again, one of the things I wanted to emphasize here is that, you know, when we talk about all of these approaches, they're never easy. You can go away, you can listen about these, you know, approaches. But I think it's so important to have a methodology in place that will help you to change your behaviors in areas that you want change, of course. And, you know, to have those commitments and getting the right level of support to help you address those issues and to build new positive habits, because it's all about the practical application. That is really what's important. So hopefully, you know, this will help to give you some food for thought and to set you up for success. Like I say, we deal with the methodology, the how, as much as the what in our 2-day course, and be very, very interested to work with you on that. And I'll be sending out details around that course after today's session. But in the meantime, any final closing remarks, Leona?
Yeah, no, I think it's to Camilo's point, I think it's really helpful and good to be having this conversation, to normalize stress, to talk about it as something that we all experience, and to put it on the table as something that we can all be really transparent and open about. And I would hope that workplaces would embrace that approach around stress too, because I think their people probably need that if that's not there, to really elevate their own mental health and how they're coping in these times. Yeah,
absolutely. I think that's something that, you know, we're working with organizations, and we see that there is a huge need for that, to invest in their teams, to really help with, and more so than ever. And like I said right at the beginning, I think this will become an area where organizations invest far greater resources than they have done in the past, because I think they're recognizing that in the pandemic that their teams are suffering, and they need support and they need guidance in this new normal, and developing those, you know, the emotional intelligence, which is such a vast and wide range of skills that enable you to deal with a variety of situations. I think that's going to be absolutely critical, quite apart from just keeping employees, you know, able to be balanced emotionally and be stable. It's actually a great investment in terms of getting them to be loyal, committed and engaged, and creative as well. And that creativity and passion will create great organizations as well. So I see the future with optimism in that regard.
Yep, same.
Good. Well, thank you, everyone. It's been a pleasure for Leona and I to talk to you all, and hope to see you again at Fireside Chat number 3. We'll be writing to you just to let you know when we've got that arranged. And in the meantime, again, thanks for your support in coming out and listening to us, and see you all soon. Take care.